So later we will have to copy it back into place, but let's just continue with all our other parts. And actually, let's carry on here from the very top. So here we have the barrel cylinder low. Let's select the sharp edges, and I want to deselect this loop here. So then let's mark it, and let's also check the other side here. And I also want to uncheck these here, or clear, I should say. So then what we have to do is select an edge where we want that seam to go through, and we can have it coming here all the way through from this side to the other. So let's mark that. And then with that selection, let's unwrap it. And it appears as if that already did a good job. Actually, no, it didn't. Take a look at the checker pattern. Now, if we put it to conformal, now it actually did a much better job. So here we have a case where we had to play around with these settings. And now let's select these faces and let's hit that rectify button here on text tools. And it seems as if that did a rather good job. So in some cases, it works just fine like that. So we don't have to do this follow by quad thing that we were doing earlier. But let's carry on here with the next piece. Here we have some edges that we actually don't need. So this is further optimization by selecting them and dissolving them. And then we just have to do this vertex connection here. It's very convenient that we can do that while we are unwrapping. No need to go over to the modeling mode for that. And then whenever we have this connected, it's the same process as usual, which is sharp edges. We should probably put that on the quick favorites, but I'm not sure I did that in the tutorial. Because sometimes, you know, I just want to show you the standard way how to access the tools. Because if I start putting too much on these quick favorites, like this here, then at some point it might be a bit overwhelming. And that's why my philosophy is to keep it as basic as possible here and use the standard ways. So I'm just going to add these edges here to it. Now let's select it and unwrap. And we can leave it with conformal. Let's select all these faces here and let's try with the rectify. And this actually looks pretty good, I have to say. I don't think we need to do anything further, but regardless, let's try if we get a better result here with the UV squares. So I'm gonna try the square grid, but that actually looks more distorted. So let me try with that one here, snap with equal distance. And that also doesn't seem right. So I'm gonna stick here with a rectify. That actually does a decent job, and we don't have to do that extra step with the follow active quads that we were doing before. So sometimes it's worth trying these different tools that we already have at hand here in order to minimize the work. So now on that one, let me also disable the mean crease so that it's easier to see where we place our edges. And let's get a head start here as usual with our sharp edges. I have the sharpness at 30. And now we just want to deselect this outer loop here. And then we want to add these edges here. So let me mark the seam. That way it's a little bit easier for you to see where I have it. It's actually a bit hard to see sometimes because it's overlaying with the other edges. So what I was thinking of doing is going here to the preferences, and once again I want to change the theme here in the 3D viewport category. And then here where it says edge seam, right now it's showing as red. Let me put that to maybe a bright green. So hopefully that way it's gonna be a bit more easy for you to see. And I'm gonna stick with that for now. So now you see the seams that I already marked here. Let's also add these seams to it. So we press U and mark it. And then here at the front, let's take another look around, and also here. And I'm not sure why that is, but this edge that we have there seems to not have been welded properly. I'm gonna put the threshold really low, and you can see I had two vertices here. So what I want to do is clear that seam there to have that continuous. And also here I want to define an edge seam. So let's mark that on both sides. And then let's carry on here. We're not done yet with that piece. I'm just gonna make it a bit bigger so that you see better where I marked those seams. And let's select it here until that point and mark it. And then here at the front, we also have to define an edge seam here for the cylindrical parts. So I'm gonna mark those. And also I wanna mark that here so that this is its own UV island. And now that I look at it, this here needs to be marked. And then we can clear these ones here. So that looks better now. And then what I sometimes like to do on a bit more of a complex piece like that is to simply unwrap it already and see what we get. So let's do that. And then we can both look here in the 3D viewport as well as here on the left side where we see our islands unfolded. So on a first look, I don't see any distortion. That's already a good thing. But here, for example, I actually want to have that as one UV island. So I'm gonna clear that seam. And everything else looks fine the way it is. So let's select it all again and then unwrap. So that was just a small fix, but now we have this piece at the bottom also as one UV island. And now one thing that is quite obvious is that we want to align this one here. So now you would think, well, let's use the rectify again. But you can see that absolutely doesn't work, unfortunately. So we want to select just one of these tiles, go to UV squares, put it to grid by shape, and then follow active quads. And then we want to put the size to even. So now we have it perfectly unwrapped as a stripe. And like I was saying before, I wish that we had a simple button that lets us do that instead of having to do 3 actions basically. Is a bit strange that way. But now that we have that, we can continue with the next piece. So that one should be straightforward, sharp edges. And let's mark it. Let me just take another look around here where these marks are located. And since that is fine, let's unwrap it. And that came out really nice. So I'm just gonna leave it like that. Let's continue with the next piece. And here we have it, our cylinder. So the first thing I want to do is select that vertex point, grow the selection, press M, and then let's collapse that. I admit it looks pretty ugly the way that this is all merging there to the center, but it works. It's perfectly fine that way. And that way we save us a few extra polys. So let's select one of these edges where we already put the crease on. Let's go to select similar and say crease. And now we already have the perfect selection here where we can press U and say mark seam. So now the only thing I want to do is select all of these edges here. We have to do that manually. And then once we have this all selected, we're gonna simply unmark it so that this is all one UV island here and it doesn't have this split there at these edges. At first I was a little bit concerned that maybe we have too much of an angle then, which sometimes can result in a bit of a strange looking normal map, but I even made a test bake and it came out perfectly fine. Let's press U and clear seam. And now let me just select everything here. Press A and put the mean crease to 0. So that way we only see our marked seams. And yes, they are red again. I think there's some error or something because it was supposed to be green. But regardless, I selected these two edges and let's add them to our marked seams so that this is where the split is. And here on that upper part, I'm also going to define this seam here at the top. So let's mark seam. And now let's press A and then unwrap. And here's a funny thing where you can see this is completely messed up until we put it to angle based. So it's definitely worth playing with these settings, as you can see. We can also try to uncheck fill holes, which for whatever reason also sometimes results in a bit of a different look. So regardless of whether it's actually filling any gaps or not, these settings are worth trying, and then we do the packing with our UV packer anyway. So the cylinder is unwrapped. Now let's carry on here with that piece. That is straightforward. And then unwrap. Let's just take a quick look. Oh, and that face at the bottom, we can delete it since we will never see it. So right on to the next piece, extractor low. Let's also go over here and sharp edges. So in that case, I think that came out perfectly fine. We just have to define one of these seams there for that stripe. Let's select it all and perfection. Now we just have to go over here to the element mode, select these pieces, and then let's try grid by shape. That didn't look good, but square grid does a good job. We have a bit of a distortion here at the upper face, but it's really minimal, and I think we should just keep it that way. So here we have our frame low. Let's see what we have here. And let's apply sharp edges. Now let's just mark it. That way it becomes more visible. And for whatever reason, this got reset. I think I saved the scene, came back the next day, I loaded it, and somehow it was gone. So I can't tell you exactly why, but I just do that again and hope it lasts here, that we see that as green. But now let's just mark this seam here. And here at the bottom, I want to clear it so that this is continuous there. Let's mark that one here. And let's take a quick look around. We want to have the seam defined here for the stripe. And also we have to define it here. So I am just gonna put it here at the top because it's less visible there. And then also here I want to have some seams. So let's put that. On the other side we already have it, based on our angle selection. And upon zooming in here, we have a little bit of fixing to do here. And maybe it's just on my end, maybe you already have it looking good, but you can see this vertex point sticking out a bit here, this one. So I want to go to the modeling view for it in order to fix it. Enable the high poly and then let's select both of these meshes, only here for that frame, so that it says two objects, and I'm gonna take it into isolation mode. And then I select these vertex points. Now we have two vertex points selected. And then I'm gonna switch over to the front view and align that here according to this edge flow. And this one here we can also align a bit better. So now this is looking much better. We fixed it both on the high poly as well as on our low poly. And that means we can go back here to the unwrapping, the UV editing tab. So what I want to also do is go to the edge mode, select these edges and clear them. And the same thing here. It's still a little bit difficult to see, I admit, but these edges here, let's clear them. Because, you know, whatever we click on, it's getting the same color what is underlying, so it's a bit hard to see. I wish that was done in a different way here in Blender, but I hope you don't have too much trouble seeing the edges I'm selecting. Now I want to mark these here at the top, and then here at the bottom I want to clear that one. This edge is sticking out a little bit, so it got selected by our angle selection. And I also want to clear that. I'm going to unwrap that all as one piece. And this one here I want to connect. On the other side we already have it. And you know, let's dissolve this edge loop here. Let's dissolve that, and then we simply connect it over like that. So that way we save some extra polys. And here we have the same thing. Let's dissolve. We don't need to connect anything there. These edges here, I also gonna just optimize a bit. Connect it like that. So that way we also got rid of one little edge loop there that didn't contribute anything to the overall mesh. And here's another thing I want to do. I want to select these faces here at the inside of that part, because even though they're barely visible, they consume up quite a lot of texture space. So I'm gonna delete these faces only here on that right side. Everything else I'm gonna leave intact. Let me just go over here to the modeling view to show it better to you. This is what we deleted, and then once we're done unwrapping, we simply copy it back. So that way we have that optimized. Let's go unwrap. And let's see what we get out of this. Let me uncheck fill holes, see if that makes any difference, but I'm not seeing anything different. So now one thing that is quite obvious is that that piece here looks a bit strange. This is the inner part here of our trigger guard. And I want to uncheck these two edges here where we defined the seam. And let's try here. So that way we changed a bit the position. And now if we unwrap it and we put it to angle based, you can see that that piece came out much better now. So one thing I want to do is select that piece here while we have this element mode on. And let's just align that a bit better here by rotating it. So that way we don't have this offset angle on it. So now we also have a few of these stripe elements where we want to straighten them out. Let's take a look at these ones here at the upper right. It will probably look different on your end where these things are located. So let me try here with our text tools, the rectify. And in that case, it worked perfectly fine. So for some pieces, it's worth always trying the rectify button. But if that doesn't help, we do the follow active quads technique. Here's something that doesn't look good. What I want to do is switch over to our knife tool and let's cut over here and then here as well. And then we can take that vertex point and make a cross connection here to the top and the bottom. So now we just have to unwrap it again. And you can see it's looking much better now. So I also want to connect it like that here. Didn't do that earlier. And now this piece looks perfectly fine. No distortion. And we just have to do that once more because we were unwrapping. Rectify, and this piece here, I just want to rotate that again. So everything else, I think we should leave it as it is. We do have some pieces like the side of the trigger guard where technically we could also straighten it, but they have different sized faces. So that would distort it too much then. So let's carry on with the next piece here. Frame piece low. Let's put the sharpness angle to 45 and see what that gives us. And that looks fine. So I'm going to mark these seams and let's unwrap it. So in this case, our faces have overall the same width. I'm not talking about the length, but the width. And that's why I want to go over here and straighten them. Let's put it to grid by shape and then follow active quads. And let's do the same thing here. And that way we don't have this curve, and that will result in better packing. So the next piece is this tiny cylinder that we will probably barely ever see, but regardless, let's take a look. And since that was a primitive, it already came with the unwrapping coordinates. So all we have to do is delete these faces on the side, and everything else already has the stripe unwrap. So I continue here with the next piece then. Let's also go over here once more to our sharp edges. And then I want to deselect these edges here so that we only have it at the side. Let's unwrap it. Sorry, I forgot to mark it. And also we still have the bottom face here. I'm slightly confused. I thought I already had that deleted for the low poly, but let's just do that again and then unwrap. And we can leave it like that here. It doesn't matter which way we change these settings to. So let's carry on here with the next piece. And in that case, I'm just gonna individually select the edges. But I also want to delete the face here at the bottom. So let me select that and let's mark it. And then we just have to define one edge seam here for the stripe part. So here we have a case of a distortion. What I want to do is press Ctrl A and do a reset X form. So now we don't have any scaling issues. Let's unwrap it again, and you can see now it's perfectly uniform here. And we can leave it like that. So here comes the grip. This one we already did, so we don't have to do anything else for it. Let's continue with the hammer. I'm gonna collapse the mirror modifier. Let's make sure it's set to merge so that it welds together. And then we can also, as always, make use of our sharp edges. But before I do that, I want to dissolve these center loops here because they will just add to our poly count while doing nothing for us. So let's get rid of that. And since I'm doing the voice narration, there's one thing where I didn't connect it in the tutorial. I'm putting it here with this arrow. So here we have this n-gon. You can just simply connect these vertex points to make a better connection there. I was kind of missing that step and it didn't really have any problems, but you can just connect it to make sure. So I'm gonna put the sharp edges, deselect these two edges, and then let's mark it. So that is looking good. Aside from here, let's clear those ones. Everything else should be unique UV islands as we have it here. So let's go over and unwrap it. So as I always like to do, even if everything looks fine, is to see if we get any other results here by playing with these settings. But it makes no difference whatsoever, so it's perfect as it is. Let's just keep it that way and let's carry on here with our rail. So I'm just gonna make a quick freeze frame here to let you know that we have to fix something now. Unfortunately, it's been a few years since the last time I made a Picatinny rail, and I forgot that we need to do a certain kind of beveling around some of these edges, and presently I don't have that. So what that means is, in order to get the perfect bake, we need to do a little bit of fixing. It's not going to take too long, but it's very important. So let me show you what the problem is before we get to fix it. Let's go back here to the modeling tab, and then currently we have only the low poly showing. Let's unhide the high poly and let's just hide the low poly for the moment. So I'm gonna re-enable our remeasure modifiers only here for that piece. And then whenever that is done loading, you will get to see better what the current issue is. So here we have it. Now let's see with our low poly, and especially once we get to the top view. You can see that we have this empty space here, and that is something that will result in a strange looking normal map around these edges. So we have to bevel it a little bit in order to match our low poly with the high poly. So apologies that this didn't occur to me sooner, even though I made these rails in the past, but it's been a while and I simply forgot about that. So what we want to do is delete the right side here on our low poly, and then let's also get rid of these edges here. So let's make a selection here from the side, not that edge here, but everything at the inside. So let's dissolve that, and the next step that we have to do is use our knife tool. And we want to make a connection here by pressing C. That way it's perfectly aligned. And that way we have this here as another uniform edge going over to the right and the left side, because here we also have to do it. Let's press C in order to make that straight. And then let's just connect it over here. We need these edges here to be perfectly straight, because once we do the bevel, it would otherwise result in some problems, the way that the bevel shapes up. I also want to go to the top view and dissolve these edges here, also so that our bevel doesn't mess up. And then, unfortunately, we also have to dissolve these edges. So let's zoom in from the front view, and I'm gonna take all these edges here. Make sure not to delete these ones here, or dissolve I should say. But everything here at the inside, like I have it here, we can now safely dissolve. So let's do that, and that way now we have the space here all empty, and that way we can make a bevel. It's always annoying having to do these post fixes, but that way we rule out any issues. So now I'm gonna go over here to the top view with our high poly. That way we can better see how far we have to do the bevel. And then maybe let's do it actually from that angle here. So with Ctrl B, we're gonna make that bevel here now in order to have this also round on our low poly. One segment is enough. Let me just check both these sides. but it works fine. So now the only thing I want to do here is select this edge that we have everywhere now due to the bevel. Let's select all of them. Let's dissolve it. And then we properly connect it like that here. So all the way through. And that way it's properly connected. And that already took care of it here. Now we just have to do what we were doing earlier, where we also make the connections here on these points. So I'm gonna do it only for one, so that we better see where it is once we go to the front view. And then while we are in the X-ray mode, let's connect it on all of them. So while we're at it, let's also do that here for the other ones. Let's connect it. And then we have another one here. Let me just double check. This one here, and then let's take it over here so that we have quads there and no n-gons. And then also this one here. Let me just show you, and yes, let's connect that. So that way we have this all back in place here. And then we can connect it back here like this. We also have to do that on the part where the rail is built into the revolver at the front barrel part. We will get to that in a moment. And as you can see, even though it's a bit annoying, but it doesn't take very long. And these post fixes, they sometimes do happen. And fortunately, it's not after we were already doing the baking or something like that. That would have been even more annoying. So I'm gonna connect it here. Also this. And then we can dissolve these edges that we were doing here earlier. This one here, let's simply dissolve that. Because we only needed those for the bevel to work fine. Same as this one. And now we have this beautifully beveled and it's gonna bake flawlessly. This is the most important. And then I'm gonna simply connect these ones here back. There was also something on the high poly that I spotted. Now that I put the rail under the magnifying glass again. And I guess that there was just a few things I didn't notice when we did the remeasure. You will see it in just a moment. It's not a big deal, we can fix it really quickly. But for now, let's just put the mirror modifier back on here. On our low poly. So then let's make sure we have it set to merge. And I'm just gonna put it to a lower threshold to rule out that we merge anything that's not supposed to merge. So for this part here specifically, we're gonna keep it like it is on the high poly. But our low poly now is perfectly set up. We just have to once again delete the side here on that end because we're sharing the texture space. And it's actually easier to make this selection here from our orthographic side view. Let me zoom in. And that already has the whole selection here for the side. Let's just then also add these parts here at the bottom to it. So that we only have one half with that texture on it. So that way we can simply delete that. And then the other thing was on the high poly. So let me hide the low poly folder. And maybe you already spotted it before I did and you were thinking, what the hell is this? Fortunately, that's something we can fix really easily with our knife tool. So we can simply connect it back up like this here. And then we have to put the crease there on these edges. So earlier when I collapsed these center edges there, it was for optimization and we can keep it that way on the low poly. But the problem was that I collapsed that before we even got to the high poly part. So that's why now we have to connect it back. And here with these edges now, let's just put them to crease. So then whenever this is done loading, it will look as it's supposed to. So that's really it. We can then toggle that off again here for our high poly. We're gonna turn it all back on once we get to the final steps. But for the best performance, we toggle it off. So now we can go back to the low poly, and for some strange reason, I have another issue here where we have this little gap. So I'm selecting the vertex that is sort of below it, because the other one is perfectly aligned straight on that edge. And then I'm gonna go over and snap it here with our vertex snap, select everything and merge by distance. So now we finally have the low poly. Maybe you didn't even have this issue because I was checking here on the high poly and it was fine on that. You can see we don't have this issue here, but it's always worth double checking. And that means we can go back here to the low poly and carry on with our unwrapping. So speaking of which, let's go to edge mode and select our sharp edges. I'm gonna deselect these ones here. And then let's mark it and see what we got. These ones here I also want to clear. And then let's see here from the side. It's looking fine. And just one thing I want to do is to clear these edges here. So like that here. And then the same here. Again, it's a bit hard to see my selections, but it's the bottom edges. So that way we have this new bevel segment still as a part of that side, and everything else on the top is planar. For these parts, I want to grow the selection and clear these edges that we currently have marked as a seam. That way we keep it as one UV island per element. And this edge I also want to mark it. So now with that selection, let's unwrap. Let's see what we get. And as usual, let's try here with these buttons. Let's see if anything changes. And it doesn't seem to matter whether we have this checked on or off. Now everything else also looks good. No distortion anywhere, and that is what matters. So that pretty much is fine then, and we can continue here with these screws. So for these screws, I was thinking let's just have one unwrapped and then we share the texture space for the other three. So let's delete them, and that way we only keep that one here. I'm gonna delete the bottom, and then let's select these edges here at the top. And in that case, I'm gonna make an exception. This is all that I wanna have here. Let's unwrap it like that. So we don't need to produce any extra UV islands here. I think we should just have it as one continuous, aside from the center part. So now on to the next smaller piece here. Let's see what we get with our default sharp edges angle. It might be that we want to increase it so that we get these parts here as one island. Putting it to 50, now we have this here deselected there at the center, and that should be fine. So now let's unwrap. That way we still have a ton of individual faces, but not as many as if we had left it at 30 with our angle. So now let's go to our rear side and let's switch to the modeling tab for a moment, because there's a bit of optimization left on it. And what I want to do is select this edge all the way to this point here at the front, and let's dissolve it so that we don't have all these extra polys. And here for the bottom part, let's take a look at it. We don't see it, so let's delete that. That way we don't even need to unwrap it at all. And now here we have another edge loop that we can also dissolve. We just have to keep this one here at the center of this cutout shape. Let's connect that, and also over here I forgot to connect that earlier, so let's make that. This one can also go over here. We have this tiny edge there going down at the center. This is fine. It's sort of like a support edge. So let's zoom in on that once we have that connected. And let's select that vertex point that leads down there. And then we're going to connect it like this here to the left. And let's connect it again with the one here on the right. And let's also join that. So before I forget it, these edges here should also be connected. And that looks like we got it all. So let's see with our sharp edges. So let's go back to the UV editing mode. And let's switch to our edit mode. And let's switch to edge, followed by our sharp edges. And it looks fine. I'm gonna have the sharpness back to 30 and let's mark it. There's just two edges that we want to add to that. These ones here, mark seam. And now let's unwrap it, see what we get. And this came out perfectly fine. It's all aligned and we don't have any distortion. So that means we can carry on with the next piece, which is our rear side piece low, this very small one. So that one, I also want to optimize it a bit more. Let's delete these faces here and then let's also dissolve those. And I'm gonna then simply connect it over here like that, as well as deleting this edge here or dissolving it. So everything else should be straightforward, sharp edges and mark seam. And now let's simply unwrap. Let me zoom in here on these faces, but it looks like it's perfect, no distortion. So we go straight to the next one. This one here, like I was saying earlier, we don't want to have the faces at the back. So let's delete that. And I just noticed that I forgot to dissolve this vertex point that is sort of loose there. If you want, you can dissolve that. It didn't cause me any issues to bake it like that. But sometimes if you go over it a second time, like I'm doing with the voice narration, I notice these things. So here we have it. We can leave it like that. And then let's carry on with this piece. And I decided to actually get rid of this one here entirely. So I'm gonna delete it and just simply cap it back on here. Give it an inset and collapse so that this little piece is just normal map information then, since we have it on the high poly. Now let's select those sharp edges. And let's already go ahead and mark it. So the loop that I want to deselect is this one here. Let's clear that so that this is one continuous stripe. And then I'm gonna define these edges here while pressing Control. And I'm gonna mark them here basically all the way through, also on that side, so that we have one continuous split there. So that way we can unwrap it as a stripe. And let me just also do an inset here on that and collapse to the center. Now let's go over and unwrap. So it mostly came out okay, but we still have to make stripes out of these cylindrical elements such as here. So for that one, let's do what we were doing before. We select this, then we say grid by shape and follow active quads. Let's just put it from length average to even so that we have a more of an even spacing here. And then let's carry on with the next one. Grid by shape and follow active quads. And then the same one here. And yes, we do have a bit of a distortion then, but ultimately it's better having it that way. Not only is it easier to texture it that way if we have it square, but also we do a better job packing it. So this is why we want to have it that way. And then we can already continue with our next piece here, which is our trigger. So there's just one thing that I want to do, which is to delete the left side so that we only unwrap this part and save us a bit of texture space. And also I want to give it a slight bevel here. So let's snap it here over like that. And then I'm gonna go out of the snapping and merge it. The reason why I do that is that we can then unwrap it all as one part and it's not such a 90-degree angle down there. So let me mark those seams that we get from our sharp edges. And then I want to select these ones and clear it. And also up here, let's have that as one UV island. So let's clear that. Everything else looks fine. Also here on that side. These ones here I want to clear as well. So then let's go over and unwrap. So that came out nice. Let's see if we have any distortion, but I'm not seeing it. These settings don't make any difference either here, so that would be the trigger, and we're on to the last piece for our revolver. So that one, let's delete the side here at the back, that face. Then let's manually just mark this seam here and define an edge seam. Let's unwrap it. And here we also have to do the Control A and then let's put it for the scale. That's where that originates from, that problem. Now we have it all uniform here, no distortion. And now what we have to do is to go back to the pieces where we were deleting some parts, and we have to copy it back. But before we do that, let's not forget to also unwrap our bullet. And what I want to do with that is to optimize it a bit further. I think earlier I was going a little bit too strong here on the edge count. I want to keep it like that on our case, but here I'm going to select every second edge, grow the selection with Shift, Control and plus on the numpad, and then we can do an edge loop connection like that and dissolve the edges. That way it's still high poly enough. I also going to dissolve this edge loop there. Here at the front, let's dissolve this one and also that one. That's still round enough. I want to leave it like that here for the case, like I was saying, because that's more visible than that bullet. It's questionable whether we're gonna ever see the bullet. The bullet is sort of hidden in the cylinder anyway, as opposed to that piece which is sticking out. Let's put the sharp edges on. I'm gonna dissolve some individual loops like these ones, and then let's mark it. Then what we have to do is define our seams here. So I'm gonna take it all the way through here. Let's mark that. And then also here at the inside, let's do that also. Let me just do an inset here at the center and collapse it. And let's unwrap it. So let's see for our distortion. And it looks fine. Now we just have to go over here and do the same thing we did before. Grid by shape and follow by active quartz. Gonna put it to even, but it didn't seem to make any difference in that case. So we can select either this face here, or we can select that one if we wanted to go up horizontally here for this stripe. Not that it really makes a big difference for our packing. It should be the same either way in terms of space. And now that we have the UV packer, it's doing an even better job. Now let's also select the bullet. I'm gonna apply our checker pattern. And then I'm just gonna manually define our loops here. So these ones, let's add them to it. And then here at the center, let's also mark that. And let's define an edge split here. And here only for these two edges, all the way through here, so that these pieces here can be standing on its own UV island. And then same for the one at the front. We're gonna leave that cylindrical. But these parts here, we wanna have as stripes. So what I'm gonna do is, let's align only these edges here. Now we can go over here with these faces, say grid by shape and follow active quartz. That way it's a little bit more accurate. And our alignment is the best it can be in that case. So this one here, let's also follow active quartz for the inside part. And now let's take a look at what else we have. So there's actually one thing now that I keep looking at the cylinder where I'm thinking, let's do a bit more optimization on it. So I want to go back to the modeling tab, and I'm not liking this edge loop here. So I'm gonna go individually in there and dissolve those. The reason is that, as you can see, it's already round enough even without it. And this cost us quite a lot of polys for not really doing much for us. So I'm gonna simply dissolve it. And then once we have that, there is something else that I also wanna do. For that, I'm gonna go over to our snapping and let's snap these points here. So let's be careful with it. Let's not snap anything by accident. Like here. Gotta undo and do again. But that way we also save us a little bit of polys there. This is still curvy enough, and then we also have the normal map that will make it really round according to our high poly. So I just want to save a few extra polys here. Don't want anyone to send me a screenshot like, hey, this is a bit too dense. What were you thinking? So I'm gonna select it all, merge by distance. That we can also put to a lower threshold, but it's the same number. Removed 16 vertices on my end. And then let's go back to UV editing. I'm gonna take it into isolation. And the only thing that I also want to change is to clear these edges here. So I'm gonna have to select them individually because we connected it to some of these vertex points. So that way we can make a straight continuous loop selection through it. Gotta select it individually, and then we can clear those. And that way we unwrap this whole front piece as one UV island, and we don't have these tiny islands floating around. So I'm gonna clear that. And everything else can stay the way it is. Let's select it, and then once more we're gonna unwrap it. And let's uncheck fill holes. It's still a bit of a bizarre case to me. Why do we have to uncheck fill holes in order for that to look right? But that's the rules. Sometimes we have to try these different settings to get the best result. So like I was already saying, we did the fixes here. Now we also have to do it here. Yes, I know it's a bit annoying, but unfortunately we have to do it here as well. And it's gonna be a quick fix. So let's just take these edges on both sides and then let's dissolve it. I just want to uncheck these two edges here. Only these ones that are sort of like zigzag going. And let's also dissolve these two here. So then, speaking of dissolving, we also want to clear out the ones that are going through the center here. So these ones here, let me just select one of them and then we can see here where the selection is. I'm gonna select them all here. And also here on that side, I want to do that. Now let's just double check before we dissolve anything. We want to clear the ones here at the front. So double check and then dissolve, or you could manually dissolve them. And now I want to make another one of these cuts while pressing C in order to have it constrained. I'm gonna snap this vertex point, and while we're at it, let's also snap that here. So here on that side, let's do the same thing. Knife tool, pressing C to make it perfectly aligned, and let's connect it, and then let's dissolve this edge here. Now we have to do the same thing here on that side. So let's just continue with this one. Let's connect it. Let's dissolve this edge, or else we get problems when we want to do the bevel. And the same thing here. Let's connect that. Then we can snap it. And that got a bit messed up. Let me try from that angle. And also this one here. Now I'm gonna merge. Let's just put it down the threshold, but yeah, 4 vertices. Just want to rule out to merge nothing that we're not supposed to merge. And while I'm at it, let me also snap that one here and target weld. Now let's select these edges so that we can do our bevel. And I promise this is the last annoying fix, or at least as far as I can remember. But this is a quick fix. Now we just want to go back here to our high poly piece, and we want to enable the visibility for the modifier on that piece specifically here, our barrel high. So once that is done loading, we can find us a good angle where we see how far that bevel should go. And let's take it from here. So on the left you can see my distance here. Let's just put it to 0.36 to give it a round number. Not that it really makes a difference, but that way you can see if you have roughly the same. I'm gonna toggle off the modifiers again on our high poly, and then it's exactly the same as on our upper rail. We have to make these connections here properly and also dissolve that edge here, this edge. So let's take that into the front view, select all of them and dissolve. Now we can connect it over like that here, and then we have to do the same thing here on that side. Connect that, and now we also have to reconnect these parts here. So I'm just gonna do it on one. Select that edge, see where it pops up, and now we can go over to vertex mode and do it through all of them. And now we also see where we have to do it. Let's do the same thing here, and also here at the center we have one. just double check, but you see it here. Now we have that connected back up. And we just have to do the same thing here over to the right side. So that might look a bit more complicated than it actually is, but that's just an easy way to connect it through all our faces here at the same time. And then just make sure to double check. This one here we have to do manually. So let's also connect that. If you want, you can also connect these ones, but it's not really necessary. It's not going to cause us any issues, because I noticed I forgot to do that on the other parts then. But it's not going to cause any overlapping. So now we can also dissolve that edge again. Connect that back up here. Same here, we don't need that. That was just a support edge so that we do a bevel without any distortion. And now we can simply remove it again. So here on that side, same thing, connect and dissolve. And then, speaking of connecting, let's connect these ones. And I could have just gone into the X-ray mode and do it on both sides. It's something that I just noticed now that I do that again, or I voice narrate. But as long as we connect it here, also on that side, that's what matters. And then what we can do here is to select these edges and let's mark them as a seam. So this one here too. That way we take into account that this is where we want our UV islands to be. And then we can simply clear these edges here. These 6 edges, let's clear it. And that way we already have our markings in place here. And we can then jump back to the unwrapping editor once more for that piece.